I can't believe this is happening.
This is a story about a woman named Agnes, her mother Helen, and the man Agnes was about to marry, Alfred. It is a story about a wedding day, a day that was supposed to be the happiest day of Agnes's life, filled with white lace, beautiful flowers, and promises of forever. But on this day, in her beautiful white dress, Agnes would hear words spoken by the man she loved. They were not words of love. They were words so cruel, so full of venom, that they would not only break her mother's heart into a million pieces, but would change the course of her own life forever. I promise you, you will want to stay for this powerful, emotional story. It is a story packed with life-changing lessons about respect, true love, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. So please, get comfortable and prepare to be moved as we dive into this unforgettable story. And before I proceed with this story, my beautiful, loyal, and great family, welcome back to our channel. How are you all doing? Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, I bow before you with love and humility. Bless every woman who finds strength in her silence, every mother who sacrifices her dreams for her children, every daughter who brings light to her home, and every grandmother whose prayers protect her family. Women are the foundation of love, the heart of every story, and the crown of every home. Father, bless them with honor, peace, and endless joy. Amen. My dear family, my heart is heavy. I pour my soul into these stories, yet so many no longer stay until the end. When you leave halfway through, it feels like all my hard work is for nothing. But I won't stop because love doesn't quit. My love for you and my respect for every woman are stronger than pain and greater than any disappointment. For those of you joining us for the first time, I know you might have doubts, but remember, trust is the seed of love, and I have never broken your trust. Every story I give you comes from a place of prayer, sacrifice, and deep respect for women and families. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write I love stories by Virtuous. And please, if you are new to this channel, welcome. I want you to do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell. Please give this story a like if it touches your heart. Agnes's mother, Helen, was a simple woman. She had a face that told the story of her life. There were lines of laughter around her kind, gentle eyes, and lines of worry on her forehead from the many years she had spent raising Agnes all by herself. Her husband had passed away when Agnes was just a little girl, leaving Helen to be both a mother and a father. Near her left temple, there was a small, pale scar that faded into her skin, a faint reminder of a factory accident from a long, long time ago. Her hands were not soft. They were the hands of a woman who had worked hard every day of her life. She had scrubbed floors, washed dishes in a busy restaurant, and mended clothes for neighbors to make sure her daughter never went without. And Agnes was her mother's daughter. She was quiet, but she was brilliant. She had a mind like a diamond, clear and strong. She saw the world in numbers and patterns, and she understood things that other people found very difficult. She loved her mother more than words could ever say. She saw the sacrifice in her worn hands and the endless love in her tired eyes. Agnes promised herself that one day she would give her mother a life of comfort and peace, and she did. After finishing at the top of her university class, Agnes became a chartered accountant. She got a job at a big company, a company that was owned by a young, ambitious man named Alfred. When Agnes started working there, Alfred's company was sinking. It was like a big ship taking on water, and Alfred, the captain, did not know how to fix the leak. He was laying off his staff, good people who had worked for him for years, because he could not afford to pay them. The company was facing bankruptcy. It was very close to the end.
Agnes, working in her small, quiet office, saw the problem. She saw the numbers, and she understood the story they were telling. She stayed late every night, for weeks, surrounded by papers and reports. She did not do it for a promotion. She did it because she could not stand to see good people lose their jobs. She made a plan. It was a brilliant plan, a brave plan. She took her plan to Alfred. At first, he did not want to listen to a quiet, young accountant, but she explained it so clearly, with such confidence, that he had no choice but to pay attention. He decided to trust her. He decided to follow her plan. In less than 6 months, everything changed. Agnes did not just stop the ship from sinking, she turned it into the biggest, fastest ship on the sea. The company was not just saved, it became a billion-dollar company. The deals she made, the problems she solved, made Alfred a billionaire. He went from being a man who was about to lose everything to a man who had everything he could ever want. And it was all because of Agnes. Alfred was amazed by her. He saw not just her brilliant mind, but her kind and humble heart. He had never met anyone like her. He fell in love with her, and she, seeing what she thought was a good and grateful man, fell in love with him. They started dating, and after a year, he asked her to marry him. But there was a small shadow in their love story, a small crack in the perfect picture. Despite having more than enough money to buy a mansion, Agnes and her mother Helen continued to live in their small, neat house in their old neighborhood. They did not buy fancy cars or designer clothes. Agnes's heart found joy not in buying things, but in giving things. She set up a foundation that provided food for homeless children and their mothers. She and Helen would spend their weekends volunteering at a community garden, growing vegetables for families who had very little. This simple life was something Alfred could not understand. When he would visit Agnes, he would shift uncomfortably on their simple but clean sofa. He would look at the small kitchen and sigh. "You could buy any house you want, Agnes. Why do you choose to stay here?" "Because it's our home, Alfred," Agnes would reply with a gentle smile. "It's filled with love and happy memories. That's worth more than any big house." Alfred's mother, Beatrice, was even less understanding. Beatrice was a woman who measured a person's worth by the price of their shoes and the brand of their handbag. She was always dripping with gold jewelry, and her voice was always a little too loud in a quiet room. From the moment she met Helen, Beatrice looked down on her. She saw her work-worn hands, her simple clothes, and her faint facial scar, and she saw a woman who was not in her class. "You must convince your mother to buy some new clothes for the wedding, Alfred," Beatrice would say to her son in private. "And a good handbag. She cannot show up looking like that. What will our guests think?" Alfred loved Agnes, but he was also his mother's son. He was easily swayed by her opinions, and a part of him was embarrassed by the simple world Agnes came from. But he was also smart enough to know that Agnes was the reason for his success. He knew that without her, his billion-dollar company could crumble. His mother had told him, "Marry her, Alfred. Secure your fortune. Once she is your wife, you can mold her. You can teach her how to be one of us." And so he pushed his doubts aside and planned the grandest wedding the city had ever seen. And now, the day was finally here. The wedding was being held at a grand hotel, in a ballroom with crystal chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, and tables covered in white silk. The air smelled of thousands of white roses. It was a scene from a fairy tale. In a large suite upstairs, Agnes was putting on her wedding dress. It was a beautiful gown, simple and elegant, just like her. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt a wave of pure happiness wash over her. Today she was marrying the man she loved. Today their new life would begin. Her mother, Helen, stood beside her, her eyes filled with tears of joy. She was wearing a simple pale blue dress. It was not a designer dress, but she had saved for months to buy it from a special little shop, and to her, it was the most beautiful dress she had ever owned. "Oh, my Agnes," Helen whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You look like an angel. Your father, he would be so proud of you today." Agnes turned and hugged her mother tightly, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Mom," she said. "Thank you for everything, for every sacrifice, for all your love. I am who I am because of you." After a few moments, Helen pulled away, gently dabbing her eyes with a small tissue. "Now, I should go downstairs. The guests are arriving, and I want to be there to greet them. I will see you when you walk down the aisle, my sweet girl." She kissed Agnes on the cheek and left the room, her heart swelling with pride. Agnes took one last look in the mirror. She felt a tiny little flutter of unease in her stomach, the same feeling she sometimes got when Alfred would make a comment about her mother's house. But she pushed it down. Today was a happy day. Nothing could spoil it. She sat down, waiting for the signal that it was time to walk down the aisle. A few minutes passed. Then, from the hallway outside her suite, she heard a sound. It was a strange sound for a wedding. It was the sound of a woman crying, not quiet, happy tears, but loud, heartbroken sobs. Then she heard another sound, laughter, and the cold, sharp voice of Beatrice, Alfred's mother. The crying sound was familiar. A cold dread washed over Agnes, a feeling so strong that it made her stand up. It was her mother. Her mother was crying. Without a second thought, Agnes opened the door of her suite and stepped quietly into the hallway, her beautiful wedding dress trailing silently behind her. The sounds were coming from a small alcove just around the corner where the guests were gathering before entering the ballroom. She moved closer, staying hidden behind a large pillar, and what she saw and heard next would stop her heart cold. It was a moment that would change everything. Forever. Agnes stood frozen behind the tall, ornate pillar. The cool marble felt like ice against her fingertips. From her hiding place, she could see a small part of the grand reception area. It was a sea of glittering jewels, expensive suits, and elegant dresses. The air was filled with the low hum of polite conversation and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Her wedding guests, the most important and powerful people in the city. And in the middle of all this glamour, she saw her mother. Helen was standing by a table laden with beautiful white flowers, looking a little lost, a little overwhelmed by all the splendor. But she was smiling. It was a gentle, proud smile, the smile of a mother on her daughter's wedding day. She held a small glass of water in her hand, her work-worn fingers looking out of place against the delicate crystal. Then Agnes saw them. Alfred and his mother, Beatrice, were walking towards Helen. Beatrice moved like a queen, her head held high, her expensive silk dress rustling with every step. Alfred walked beside her, looking handsome and confident in his black tuxedo. When Agnes saw him, her heart gave a little flutter of love. Her Alfred, her future husband.
She watched as they stopped in front of her mother. She expected to see Elfred give Helen a warm hug, to see Beatrice offer a kind word, but that is not what happened. Beatrice looked Helen up and down, her eyes moving slowly from the simple blue dress to her sensible shoes. A small, cold smile touched her lips. "Well, Helen," she said, her voice loud enough for several nearby guests to hear, "you certainly are here." Helen's smile faltered for a moment. She was confused by the strange greeting. "Beatrice," she said, her voice warm and polite, "Alfred, you both look wonderful. This is all so beautiful. Agnes is going to be so happy." "We know," Beatrice said sharply. "We spared no expense." She took a step closer, her eyes fixed on the pale blue dress. "I must say, Helen, that is a very, simple dress for the mother of the bride. Did Alfred not offer to buy you something more appropriate?" Helen felt a sharp sting of hurt. She looked down at her dress, the dress she had been so proud of. Suddenly it felt plain and wrong. I liked this one," she said quietly, her voice losing its cheerful confidence. Agnes felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She watched Alfred, waiting for him to defend her mother, to tell his own mother to be kind. This was his chance to be the good man she believed he was. Alfred looked from his mother to Helen. He looked uncomfortable. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Mom, come on," he started to say, but Beatrice cut him off with a sharp look. He sighed, and then he turned to Helen. The look in his eyes was not kind. It was a look of embarrassment. "What my mother is trying to say, Helen," Alfred said, his voice low, but not low enough that others couldn't hear, "is that this is a very important day. For me, for the company. All of our most important investors are here. Appearances matter." Helen just stared at him, her heart beginning to sink. She did not understand. "What are you trying to say, Alfred?" she asked, her voice a little more than a whisper. Alfred took a deep breath, and then he said the words that would echo in Agnes's mind forever, words that could not be taken back, words that were like sharp stones. "I'm saying that perhaps it would be best if you stood in the back during the family photos. You know, with all the photographers and the press here, we just want everything to look perfect." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Helen could not believe what she was hearing. "The back?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "But I am the bride's mother. I am Agnes's mother." Alfred's patience snapped. The discomfort on his face was replaced by a look of cold annoyance. "And look at you, Helen," he said, his voice getting louder. It was no longer a whisper. People were turning to look now. A small circle of silence was forming around them. "Just look at yourself," he continued, his words like slaps to her face. "That dress is old and washed out. And you look so old. All those wrinkles and that scar on your face." He gestured dismissively towards her temple. "It's just not fitting for a wedding like this. It's ugly. You don't belong in the front with the beautiful people. You are embarrassing my bride." Behind her pillar, Agnes felt all the air leave her lungs. It was as if she had been punched in the chest. This was not her Alfred. This was a cruel stranger wearing his face. The beautiful ballroom suddenly felt like a very cold place.
Helen stood there, completely still, as his ugly words watched over her. Each word was a physical blow, breaking a little piece of her spirit. She looked into the eyes of the man her daughter was about to marry, the man she had welcomed into her home, and she saw nothing but contempt. Beatrice let out a small, cruel laugh. "He's right, you know," she said with a triumphant smile. "You should know your place, Helen." That was when Helen broke. Her face, which had been filled with confusion and hurt, completely crumpled. A terrible, ragged sob escaped her lips, and then another. The tears she had been holding back began to stream down her face, making small, dark spots on the front of her simple blue dress. She wrapped her arms around her own waist, as if she was trying to hold herself together as her world fell apart. The guests who were watching did not know what to do. Some looked away, their faces full of secondhand shame. Others just stared, whispering to one another. And some, Agnes saw with a fresh wave of horror, had taken out their phones. They were recording her mother's pain, her utter humiliation. They were filming her as if she were some kind of show. Hidden from view, Agnes was not just watching a scene. She was experiencing an execution. The execution of her love for Alfred. In that single, terrible moment, everything she thought she knew about him turned to dust. The kind, grateful man she had fallen in love with was gone. Or, perhaps, he had never been there at all. In his place was a weak, cruel man who was so afraid of what other people thought that he would publicly destroy the kind woman who had raised the love of his life. She looked at her mother, sobbing uncontrollably, trying to hide her face in her hands. Her strong, proud mother, who had faced every hardship in life with her head held high, was now reduced to a spectacle of shame. And the man who had done it, the man she was supposed to promise to love and honor for the rest of her life, was standing right there, looking annoyed. He had not just insulted her mother, he had tried to erase her. He had tried to hide her away like a dirty secret. A fire started to burn inside Agnes. It was a cold, quiet fire. It burned away all the love, all the hopes, all the dreams she had for their future together. It burned away the happy bride in the beautiful white dress, and in her place it forged something new, something hard and strong as steel. She looked down at her gown. A few minutes ago, it had been a symbol of love and a new beginning. Now it felt like a costume for a lie. Alfred finally seemed to realize he had gone too far. He saw the phones, the staring guests. He took a hesitant step toward Helen. Helen, don't make a scene," he said awkwardly. But it was too late. The scene had been made. The damage was done. And his bride, her heart now shattered and rebuilt with cold, clear purpose, had seen it all. Behind the pillar, Agnes took one slow, deep breath. The fairy tale was over. Her mind, the brilliant mind that had saved Alfred's company, was now completely clear. She knew exactly what she had to do. And she began to walk. Agnes began to walk. It was not a hurried walk. It was slow, steady, and filled with a purpose so strong it was like a physical force. Each step she took was silent on the thick, plush carpet, the long train of her beautiful white dress whispering behind her like a sigh. The low hum of conversation in the room began to falter. The guest standing near the pillar saw her first, their eyes widening in surprise. Then their neighbor turned to see what they were looking at. A ripple of silence began to spread through the crowd, moving outwards from the pillar like a wave. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Whispers died in throats. One by one, every head in the room turned toward the bride. They saw a vision. A woman who was supposed to be hidden away in her suite, waiting for her grand entrance, was instead walking through the crowd with a look on her face that did not belong at a wedding. Her expression was not of joy or nervous excitement. It was a mask of cold, quiet calm, and behind her eyes a fire of righteous anger was burning.
Alfred and Beatrice were the last to notice. They were still focused on Helen, who was trying in vain to stifle her heartbreaking sobs. Alfred had just started to say something, another weak attempt to control the situation, when he felt the change in the room. He looked up, annoyed by the sudden silence, and then he saw her. His face went completely white. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at his bride, his beautiful, brilliant bride, and the confident, arrogant look on his face vanished, replaced with pure, dawning horror. He knew, in that single terrible instant, that she had heard. Beatrice saw the look on her son's face and turned. When she saw Agnes, her sharp, cruel smile froze and then fell away. A flicker of genuine fear entered her eyes. Agnes did not look at them. As she drew closer, she did something that was more powerful than any angry word she could have spoken. She walked right past them. She looked straight through Alfred, her future husband, as if he were made of glass. She passed Beatrice as if she were nothing more than a statue in the room. Her entire focus, her entire world, was on the broken woman crying by the table of flowers. She stopped in front of her mother. The guests watched, holding their breath. In her magnificent wedding gown, a dress that had cost a fortune, Agnes slowly knelt down on the floor. The pristine white silk of her dress pooled around her on the carpet. She was now at eye level with her mother, who was hunched over in her grief. "Mom," Agnes said, her voice so soft, yet it carried through the silent room. "Mom, look at me." Ellen looked up, her face red and wet with tears. Her eyes were filled with so much pain and shame. When she saw her daughter kneeling before her in her wedding dress, a fresh wave of sobs shook her body. "Oh, Agnes," she cried, "I'm so sorry. I've ruined your day. I've embarrassed you." Agnes reached out and took her mother's work-worn hands in her own. "No, Mom," she said, her voice firm and full of a love so strong it was like a shield. "You have done nothing wrong. You have nothing to be sorry for. You have not embarrassed me. You have never, ever embarrassed me in my entire life. You are the best part of me." She used her thumb to gently wipe a tear from her mother's cheek. "We're going to go home now," she whispered. Alfred finally found his voice. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched, a fake, panicked smile plastered on his face. "Agnes, darling, what are you doing?" he said, his voice trying to sound light and charming, but it was shaking. "It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony. You should be in your room. Everyone is waiting." He was trying to pretend this was all a game, a misunderstanding. Agnes did not even turn her head to look at him. She helped her mother stand up. Helen was unsteady on her feet, still shaking with sobs. Agnes put a strong, protective arm around her mother's shoulders, holding her close. Only then did she turn to face the man she was supposed to marry. She looked him straight in the eye. The cold fire in her own eyes made him take an involuntary step back. "The ceremony is over, Alfred," she said. Her voice was not a shout. It was quiet, clear, and as final as a closing door. What are you talking about?" he stammered, looking around at the watching guests. "Don't be dramatic, Agnes. Your mother is just a little emotional." "I said," Agnes repeated, her voice cutting through his weak excuse, "the ceremony is over. The wedding is over. We are over." She let the words hang in the silent room. She saw the panic in his eyes turn to desperation. "I heard everything," she continued, her voice never rising, never shaking. "I heard every single word you said to my mother. I heard every word your mother said. And I saw the laughter, and I saw the phones recording her pain.
She glanced for a second at the people who were still holding up their phones, and they quickly lowered them, their faces flushing with shame. She turned her gaze back to Alfred. The man I thought I loved, the man I was going to build a life with, would have defended my mother. He would have cherished her, because he would have known that without her, there would be no me. Without her sacrifices, there would be no brilliant mind to save his sinking company. Without her goodness, there would be no daughter for him to love. She took a small breath. But that man doesn't exist, does he, Alfred? There is only you, a weak, cruel man who is so terrified of what these people think of him that he would crush the spirit of a good woman to make himself feel important. A man who would call my mother's face ugly, a face that holds the story of every sacrifice she made for me. Her voice dropped to a near spear, but it was filled with the sharp edge of steel. So I want to thank you, Alfred. Thank you for showing me who you really are today. Thank you for showing me before I signed a paper that would have legally bound me to a man with no heart, no loyalty, and no soul. You did not just insult my mother, you saved me. With that, she turned her back on him completely. She held her mother tightly. "Come on, Mom," she said gently. "Let's go home." And she began to walk again. She led her mother, who was still crying softly, through the stunned crowd of guests. They parted for her like the sea, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and awe. The image was unforgettable. The beautiful bride in her perfect white gown, walking away from her own fairy tale wedding, her arm wrapped around her simple, heartbroken mother. They were almost at the grand entrance when Alfred finally broke free from his shock. The reality of what was happening hit him. This wasn't just about love or a wedding. This was Agnes. This was the brain behind his empire. This was his entire fortune walking out the door. "Agnes, wait!" he shouted, starting to run after her. "Agnes, please, we can fix this. Don't go!" He was halfway across the room when Beatrice grabs his arm, her fingers digging into his expensive suit like claws. Her face was a mask of fury and humiliation. "Let her go, Alfred," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Let the little fool go. She is not the only girl in the world. We don't need her." Alfred stopped, torn between his mother's pride and his own rising panic. He watched, helpless, as Agnes and Helen walked through the grand doors of the ballroom and disappeared from sight. The doors swung shut behind them, leaving him alone in the middle of his perfect, ruined wedding, surrounded by the deafening silence of 100 shocked guests. He didn't know it yet, but his mother's words, "We don't need her," were the most foolish and expensive words she had ever spoken. The foundation of his entire world had just walked out the door, and he had been the one to push her away. The grand doors of the hotel swung shut behind Agnes and her mother, closing off the world of crystal chandeliers and silent, staring guests. The sudden quiet of the hotel lobby felt strange after the drama in the ballroom. For a moment, they just stood there, Agnes in her magnificent white gown, and Helen in her simple blue dress, a mother and daughter who had just walked through a fire together. A few people in the lobby stared, their eyes wide with curiosity. They saw the bride's tear-streaked face and the older woman she held so tightly. Whispers followed them like a shadow as Agnes led her mother towards the main exit. She did not care. The opinions of strangers meant nothing to her now. She had only one thought in her mind: get her mother home, get her somewhere safe. They stepped out into the cool evening air. A line of expensive black cars was waiting to take guests home, but Agnes ignored them. She walked to the curb and raised her hand, and a simple yellow taxi pulled over. The driver looked surprised to see a bride in a full wedding gown hailing his cab, but he said nothing. He just opened the door. Agnes carefully helped her mother into the back seat, making sure her dress didn't get caught. Then she gathered the yards of white silk and lace and climbed in beside her. "Take us to a small, quiet street in the old part of town," she said to the driver, giving him their address. The taxi ride home was a journey through a dream. They drove past the bright lights and tall buildings of the city, the world that Alfred and his mother belonged to. Agnes looked out the window, but she didn't see any of it. All she could see was her mother's reflection in the glass, her face pale and etched with pain. Inside their small, clean house, the wedding dress looked like a visitor from another world. It was too big, too white, too grand for the simple, cozy rooms filled with old photographs and handmade quilts. The first thing Agnes did was lead her mother to the comfortable armchair in the living room, the one where Helen always sat to read her books. She brought her a glass of water and a warm blanket. Helen began to cry again, but these were different tears. They were quiet tears of guilt. "I am so sorry, my Agnes," she whispered, her voice choked. "I ruined your wedding day, your perfect day. It's all my fault." Agnes knelt on the floor in front of her, just as she had done in the ballroom. She took her mother's hands. "No, Mom," she said, her voice full of a deep, calm certainty. "Listen to me. You did not ruin my day. You saved it. You saved my whole life. Today I saw the truth, and the truth has set me free. My wedding day wasn't ruined. It just ended early, before I made the biggest mistake of my life." Agnes stayed with her mother until her tears subsided and she finally fell into an exhausted sleep in her chair. Then Agnes went to her own bedroom. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at the beautiful bride staring back at her. She slowly began to undo the tiny pearl buttons that ran down the back of the dress. She let the heavy gown fall to the floor in a soft white pool around her feet. Stepping out of it felt like stepping out of a lie. She put on a simple pair of soft trousers and a warm sweater, the clothes of her real life. And in that moment, she did not feel sadness. She felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling of being cleansed. Meanwhile, back at the Grand Hotel, the storm was just beginning. One of the guests who had been filming, a distant cousin of one of Alfred's business partners, had not been able to resist. The story was too shocking, too dramatic. He had posted the video online with a simple title, "Billionaire Groom's Wedding Day Disaster." It spread like a wildfire. In less than an hour, it was everywhere. People shared it on every social media platform. News websites picked it up. The video was shaky, but the words were clear. The whole world could now hear Alfred calling his future mother-in-law ugly. They could hear him say she was too old, that her scars and wrinkles were an embarrassment. They could hear Beatrice's cruel laughter. And then they could see the most powerful part of the video, the bride, Agnes, walking through the crowd like an avenging angel, kneeling before her crying mother, and walking away from everything with her head held high. The comment section exploded. There were thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of comments, and they all said the same thing. People did not see a simple, plain woman being insulted. They saw a hard-working mother who had given everything for her child. They did not see a dramatic bride. They saw a strong, loyal daughter choosing love and respect over money and glamour. The story was simple. It was pride and cruelty versus humility and love, and the whole world was on Agnes's side.
Alfred did not know about the video at first. After Agnes left, he and his mother had tried to save face. They told the guests there had been a small family misunderstanding, a case of wedding day nerves. They insisted the party should continue. But the mood was ruined.
The guests whispered in corners, looking at Alfred and Beatrice with new eyes. People began to leave, making quiet excuses. The grandest wedding of the year had turned into the city's most humiliating failure. When Alfred finally got home to his large, empty mansion, his phone started ringing. It was his head of public relations. "Alfred, have you seen the internet?" the man asked, his voice full of panic. "You have to see this." Alfred opened his laptop, and there it was, his own face, twisted with cruelty. His mother's ugly laugh, Helen's heartbroken sobs, and Agnes walking away. He felt a cold dread creep into his heart, a fear that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with his reputation. His company's name was built on an image of success and power. This video made him look weak, petty, and cruel. His first thought was to fix it. He started calling Agnes's phone, over and over again. Each time it went straight to her voicemail. He sent her a flood of text messages. "Agnes, please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. My mother made me say it. We can fix this. Please call me." Silence. The next morning he tried a different tactic. He called the most expensive flower shop in the city. "I want you to send flowers to this address," he said, his voice urgent. "All of them. I want so many flowers that she can't even open her front door. The best ones you have, roses, lilies, everything, and a card. It should say, 'I am so sorry, I love you, forgive me, Alfred.'" Later that morning, a huge truck pulled up in front of Agnes and Helen's small house. Two men began unloading bucket after bucket of flowers. They filled the entire front porch. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of flowers. The scent was overwhelming. It was a grand, desperate, and completely empty gesture. Agnes was in the kitchen, making her mother a cup of tea when she saw the truck. She looked out at the mountain of flowers that was burying their little home. She didn't feel flattered, she felt insulted. He thought this could be fixed with flowers. He thought he could buy his way back into her heart. He still did not understand. He did not understand at all. She walked away from the window, her face calm and her resolve harder than ever. She went to her small desk, took out a clean sheet of paper, and began to write. It was not a long letter. It was simple, professional, and straight to the point. It was her official letter of resignation from the company she had built from ashes. She thanked them for the opportunity and stated that her resignation was effective immediately. She put the letter in an envelope, walked past the mountain of meaningless flowers, and dropped it into the mailbox at the corner of the street. With that simple act, she was cutting the very last thread that connected her to Alfred. She was not just walking away from a marriage, she was walking away from the empire she had created. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that without her, the empire would fall. The letter of resignation arrived on Alfred's desk the next morning. It was delivered by a special courier, a single, crisp white envelope that sat in the middle of his vast, polished mahogany desk like a final judgment. He stared at it for a long time before he had the courage to open it. He had been hoping for a phone call, a text message, anything. He had not expected this. When he read the words, simple and professional, a cold wave of pure panic washed over him, a fear far greater than any he had felt at the ruined wedding. The flowers had been a foolish gesture, an attempt to fix a broken heart. This letter was different. This was not about love anymore. This was business. This was about the very foundation of his billion-dollar world. Alfred knew, better than anyone, that his name is on the company, but Agnes's mind was its engine.
The powerful investors who had poured hundreds of millions of dollars into his ventures had not done so because of his charm or his family name. They invested because of the undeniable genius of the quiet woman who could see the future in a spreadsheet. They trusted Agnes. Her name, whispered in boardrooms and financial meetings, was a guarantee of success. Without her, he was just a rich man's son who had gotten lucky. His hands began to shake. He picked up his phone and called the one person he always turned to when he was in trouble: his mother. "She quit, Mother," he said, his voice tight with desperation. "Agnes sent a letter of resignation. She's gone."
Beatrice was silent for a moment on the other end of the line. The public humiliation of the wedding and the storm of criticism online had shaken her, but her pride was a fortress that was difficult to breach. "Let her go," she said, her voice still sharp and cold, but with a new, thin layer of uncertainty. "She's trying to scare you, Alfred. She's being dramatic. She will come back. She needs the money, the prestige." "No, Mother, you don't understand," Alfred insisted, pacing back and forth in his huge office. "She is the prestige. The investors, they're going to hear about this. The market opens in an hour. When they find out she has resigned, our stock price will collapse. We will lose everything." He was right. The news of Agnes's departure from the company leaked almost immediately. It was the final, devastating blow to Alfred's reputation. The story was no longer just about a cruel groom, but about a foolish businessman who had driven away the very architect of his success over a petty insult. The company stock, which had been a star performer, began to fall. At first it was a small dip, then it became a slide, and by the end of the day it was a terrifying free fall. The investors he had been so worried about began to call, their voices cold and demanding. They wanted to know what had happened. They wanted to know if the stories were true. They wanted to know what his plan was now that his greatest asset was gone. Alfred had no plan. For the first time in his life, he was completely lost. He decided he had to see her. He could not fix this with phone calls or flowers. He had to go to her, to beg her, to make her understand what she was doing. He left his office, ignoring the worried looks of his employees, and drove to the one place he had always felt so uncomfortable, her small house in the old neighborhood. When he arrived, the mountain of flowers was gone. The porch was clean. He walked up the steps and knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Beatrice opened the door. Her eyes were still sad, but the terrible, broken look was gone. When she saw Alfred standing there, her expression became calm and firm. She did not look afraid of him. She did not look angry. She just looked at him with a quiet, sad disappointment. "Alfred," she said, her voice even, "what are you doing here?" "I need to see her, Helen," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I need to talk to Agnes. Please, I need to apologize to you both. What I said, it was a terrible mistake. I'm so sorry. I was wrong." "Yes, you were," she said simply. She did not open the door any wider. "But Agnes does not wish to see you." "Please," he begged, his pride completely gone now, replaced by raw desperation. "Just for 5 minutes. My whole world is falling apart. I need her. The company needs her." From inside the house, Agnes's voice called out, calm and clear. "Mom, who is it?" "It's Alfred, dear," Helen called back. "Tell him I am not available." Agnes replied. Her voice was not angry. It was just final. It was the voice of a person who had made a decision and would not be moved. Helen looked back at Alfred. "You heard her," she said, and she began to gently close the door. "Wait!" Alfred cried, putting his hand on the door to stop it. "Helen, you tell her. Tell her you forgive me. You're a good person, a kind person.
Tell her that you've forgiven me and that she should too." Helen looked at him, and for the first time a flicker of pity entered her eyes. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about forgiveness. "I do forgive you, Alfred," she said softly, and he felt a surge of hope. "I forgive you because holding on to anger is a poison. And I forgive you because my daughter taught me that my heart is too good to be filled with hate. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And it does not mean that you have broken something. You broke my daughter's trust. You broke her heart. And that is not something I can fix for you. Only she can decide what happens now." She gently removed his hand from the door. "Goodbye, Alfred." And she closed the door, leaving him standing alone on the clean, empty porch. He went back the next day, and the day after that. He stood outside her house for hours like a beggar. He brought gifts, expensive jewelry, designer handbags, things he thought a woman would want. Each time, the door remained closed. The gifts were left on the porch, untouched, until he would finally give up and take them away. Even Beatrice, her pride finally shattered by the sight of her son's collapsing empire, went to the house. She knocked on the door, her face a mask of false humility. When Helen opened it, Beatrice began to apologize. "Helen, I am so sorry for what happened. It was the stress of the wedding. I wasn't myself. Please, you must convince Agnes to come back, for Alfred's sake, for all of our sakes." Agnes had been listening from the living room. She came to the door and stood beside her mother. She looked at Beatrice, her eyes cold and clear. "Do you remember what you said to my mother, Beatrice? You said she should know her place. You laughed when my mother cried. You told your son to let her go, that she wasn't needed." Beatrice flinched, her fake smile faltering. I was upset," she stammered. "No," Agnes said, her voice cutting through the excuse. "You were honest. For the first time, you showed us exactly who you are, and we believe you. My mother knows her place. It is here, in our home, surrounded by love and respect. And I know my place too. It is anywhere you and your son are not. Now please, leave my mother's property." Beatrice left, her face red with a mixture of shame and fury.
The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month. Alfred's company continued to bleed. Investors pulled their money out. Key employees who had been loyal to Agnes began to resign. The company, once a shining star, was now a falling one. Alfred was in a constant state of panic, trying to fix 100 leaks at once. But he was not Agnes. He did not have her vision, her calm, her brilliance. He was just the captain of a sinking ship, and he had thrown his only lifeboat into the sea. Meanwhile, Agnes and Helen's life was quiet. The online storm had made Agnes a hero to many people, a symbol of strength and family loyalty. She received job offers from huge companies all over the world, but she turned them all down. For now, she wanted peace. She spent her days with her mother, working in their community garden, reading books, and slowly, gently healing the deep wound that Alfred had created. She was not bitter. She was not sad. She was free. And she was ready for whatever came next. Time moves forward for everyone, but it does not move in the same way. For some, it is a gentle river, carrying them towards peace and new beginnings. For others, it is a slow, grinding wheel, turning success into dust and pride into ashes. A year passed. For Agnes and Helen, it was a year of quiet healing. The noise from the outside world eventually faded. The job offers stopped coming as Agnes made it clear she was taking a long break.
The reporters and bloggers found new stories to tell. The world, for the most part, moved on. And in the quiet space that was left, Agnes and Helen rebuilt their peaceful life. They traveled, not to fancy resorts or expensive cities, but to small, quiet places. They visited national parks, walking for miles on paths under the shade of ancient trees. They sat by the ocean, watching the waves roll in and out, feeling the salt spray on their faces. They were not running from a bad memory. They were walking towards a new future, one step at a time, together. During this time, something wonderful happened to Helen. The deep wound of humiliation which had been so painfully inflicted by Alfred and Beatrice finally began to heal. Being with her daughter, feeling her unwavering love and respect every single day was the most powerful medicine. The shame was washed away by the tide of Agnes's loyalty. The sadness was warmed by the sun of their shared laughter. The lines on Helen's face, which Alfred had called ugly, began to look like what they truly were, a map of a life well lived, a testament to a mother's enduring love. She started to smile again, a real, genuine smile that reached her kind eyes. Agnes also found a new purpose. The foundation she had started, the one that fed homeless children and mothers, became her full-time passion. With her brilliant mind for numbers and organization, she was able to make it grow in ways she never could have while working for Alfred. She secured grants, organized fundraisers, and built a network of volunteers. She was not making $1 billion, but the work she was doing was creating something far more valuable: hope. One afternoon, while volunteering at a fundraising event for a new community kitchen, she met a man named Thomas. He was a successful architect who spent his weekends designing and building shelters for families in need. He was a kind, quiet man with a warm smile and eyes that held no judgment. He did not know who she was. He had not seen the viral video. He just saw a woman with a kind heart and a brilliant mind, passionately explaining the logistics of a food distribution network. They started talking, and they did not stop. He was fascinated by her intelligence and her compassion. She was drawn to his gentle strength and his genuine desire to help others. He did not care about designer clothes or fancy cars. He too came from a simple, hard-working family, and he understood the value of things that money could not buy.
Their love story was not a whirlwind of grand gestures and expensive gifts. It was a slow, gentle unfolding, like a flower opening in the morning sun. It was built on shared values, deep respect, and quiet conversations that lasted late into the night. When he met Helen, he did not see an old woman with a scar on her face. He saw the strong, wonderful mother who had raised the woman he was falling in love with. He would sit with Helen for hours in her small garden, listening to her stories and telling her about his own family. He treated her not as an obligation, but as a treasure. For Alfred, the year was very different. His story was not one of healing, but of a slow, painful collapse. Without Agnes, his company was a body without a brain. He tried to hire the best and brightest minds to replace her, offering them huge salaries. But no one could replicate her unique vision. No one had her instinct. The company, which had once been a rocket ship, was now a stone falling from the sky. The investors, who had once praised him, now saw him for what he was. They pulled their money out, one by one, until there was nothing left. He was forced to sell off parts of the company just to pay his debts. He laid off hundreds of employees, the very thing Agnes had worked so hard to prevent. The grand offices that had once buzzed with energy and success
became quiet and empty. His mother, Beatrice, could not handle the fall from grace. Their powerful friends stopped inviting them to parties. Their names, once featured in the society pages, were now only mentioned in the financial news as a warning tale of arrogance and failure. Beatrice, who had built her entire identity on wealth and status, became a bitter and lonely woman, hiding away in her half-empty mansion. The gold jewelry began to look less like a symbol of wealth and more like the bars of a cage she had built for herself. Finally, the day came when Alfred had nothing left to sell. He was not just struggling, he was bankrupt. He had to sell off the company he had inherited, the company Agnes had transformed, for a tiny fraction of what it had once been worth, just to pay off the last of his debts. The mansion was sold. The fancy cars were repossessed. Alfred, the billionaire, was broke. He was left with nothing but a deep, hollow sense of regret. He would often find himself driving through the old neighborhood where Agnes lived, parking his cheap second-hand car down the street, just watching her small, warm house. He would see the lights on inside and imagine her in there, living her quiet, peaceful life. He did not do it because he still loved her. He did it because her house was a monument to the life he had destroyed, the happiness he had thrown away with a few cruel, thoughtless words. He had lost his company, he had lost his fortune, he had lost his status. But what haunted him most in the long, lonely nights was the memory of her face. Not the face of the brilliant accountant who had made him rich, but the woman who had loved him, the woman whose trust he had shattered so completely. He finally understood what his mother, in her pride and her fury, had failed to see. They did need her. He had needed her more than he had ever known, and now she was gone forever. He saw her one last time. He was walking down the street looking for a job when he saw her coming out of a small cafe. She was with a man. They were holding hands, laughing about something. She looked happy, genuinely, peacefully happy. Then he saw her mother, Helen, walk out of the cafe behind them, and the man, Thomas, turned and put a gentle, respectful arm around her shoulder as they all walked down the street together. Alfred stopped and hid in a doorway, his heart twisting with a pain that was a mixture of envy and deep, profound loss. He had wanted a perfect family photo for his important guests, and there it was, right in front of him. A real family, built not on money or appearances, but on kindness, respect, and love. It was the one thing his billions could never have bought him, and the one thing he, so foolishly, had thrown away.
2 years after that terrible day at the Grand Hotel, another wedding took place. This one was very different. It was not held in a massive ballroom with crystal chandeliers and a guest list of powerful strangers. It was held in the small, beautiful community garden where Agnes and her mother had spent so many happy weekends, their hands in the rich soil. The guests were not investors or society figures. They were the people who truly mattered, close family, dear friends, and the wonderful community they had built around them. The children from the shelter Agnes's foundation supported ran around on the grass, their laughter like the sound of little bells. The decorations were not thousands of expensive white roses, but simple jars of wildflowers, picked that morning and placed on wooden tables by volunteers. Agnes did not wear a grand, expensive gown. She wore a simple, elegant white dress that flowed around her as she walked. Her face was not covered in makeup applied by a professional artist. It was her own beautiful face, glowing with a pure and genuine happiness that no amount of money could ever buy. Her mother, Helen, stood beside her.
She wore a lovely dress the color of a summer sky, and this time her smile was real and unwavering. There was no fear in her eyes, no trace of the humiliation she had once endured. She looked at her daughter, at the kind man who stood beside her, and her heart was so full of peace and joy it felt like it might overflow. She was not the mother of the bride, hidden in the back. She was a place of honor, a pillar of strength, the beloved matriarch of a family built on real love. Agnes married Thomas that day under a simple wooden arch covered in climbing vines. When they said their vows, their words were not promises of wealth or status. They were promises of partnership, of kindness, and of respect, and of a shared life dedicated to making the world a little better than they found it. When it came time for the family photos, there was no discussion of who should stand where. Thomas proudly stood with his arm around his new wife, Agnes, and on his other side, he put his arm around Helen, pulling her in close. The three of them stood there together, a perfect picture of a family, their smiles genuine and bright. The story of Alfred and Beatrice also found its end. After losing everything, they were forced to move into a small rented apartment, a place even smaller than the house they had once mocked. The silence between them was heavy with blame and regret. Beatrice, without her wealth to define her, became a ghost in her own life, a bitter woman haunted by the memory of the life she had thrown away. Alfred eventually found a low-level job in an accounting firm, working in a small cubicle, a shadow of the powerful CEO he had once been. The work was difficult, and the pay was small. For the first time in his life, he had to work hard just to make ends meet. It was a humbling experience. He learned in the most painful way possible the true value of a dollar earned through honest labor. He never remarried. He dated a few times, but he found that he had nothing to offer. The charm that had once worked in boardrooms and at fancy parties meant nothing without the power and money to back it up. He was just a man with a past full of regret. Sometimes, late at night, he would take out his phone and watch the video of his failed wedding. He did not watch it to torture himself. He watched it to remember. He watched the cruelty on his own face, the arrogance in his mother's laugh, and the terrible pain on Helen's face. And then he would watch Agnes, strong and beautiful, walking away. It was his daily lesson in humility, a reminder of the man he had been and the man he never wanted to be again. Dear viewers, this story teaches us a very important lesson. It shows us that true wealth is not measured by the money in our bank accounts, the size of our houses, or the price of our clothes. True wealth is measured by the love we give and the respect we show to others. It is found in kindness, in loyalty, and in the strength of our character. Agnes did not need $1 billion to be rich. She was rich in the love of her mother, in the respect of a good man, and in the purpose she found in helping others. Alfred, even at the height of his success, was a poor man. He was poor in spirit, poor in kindness, and poor in the things that truly matter. The world may be impressed by shiny, expensive things, but in the end, it is the simple, quiet strength of a good heart that holds the most value. A mother's love, a daughter's loyalty, and the courage to choose respect over everything else, these are the true treasures of our lives. Thank you for listening to our story today. If it has touched your heart and given you something to think about, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the important lessons of life. We hope you will join us again. Until next time, take care of one another and be kind. And don't forget, at Virtuous Stories, we love you.